Good evening, everyone. My name is Helen O'Connor. I work for the GMB Union organising in the NHS, and I was a nurse myself for 28 years. Welcome to tonight's People's Assembly meeting, Uniting the Battle to Save the NHS. A deliberate programme of cuts and closures is being rolled out across the country for our hospitals. We must be clear in our campaigning that all attacks on our NHS must be reversed, and the NHS must be rebuilt fit for the future. As we move into stricter lockdown conditions, the devastating impact of cuts and privatisation have become evident, and the consequences of this for staff and patients have been deadly. And yes, I will call the people who use the NHS patients. They're not clients, they're not service users, and they most certainly are not customers. Hospital closures are not the only problem facing us. The treatment of NHS staff working within our hospitals and within our communities has also come into sharp focus. Attacks on health workers' terms and conditions has led to a recruitment crisis in the NHS. So fighting for better terms and conditions for NHS staff is not just an issue of workers' rights, it's a public health issue as well. Underfunding of the health service is not about economics or lack of money. It is part of the same strategy that led to the privatisation of big utilities like water, gas, rail, and so on. It is a deliberate strategy to create discontent with public services. And part and parcel of the cuts and privatisation strategy is to demoralise NHS staff and then sell our NHS off to the highest bidder. And this is the context in which the current demand for fair pay for health staff has to be seen. If we want an NHS capable of delivering effective and safe healthcare, it has to be on the basis of a well-trained, experienced workforce who are not just valued in words, but in terms of their pay and conditions. A major event can change consciousness quickly. What this pandemic has done is politicise NHS staff up and down this country. They are now conscious of how attacks on their own pay terms and conditions are damaging NHS services and putting patients at risk. Tonight we have three speakers, all of who are NHS full clinicians, but not only that, they're active in the labour and the trade union movement too. They will give you an inside view of what's going on within the NHS as we face the second wave of this pandemic. Please take a second before our first speaker starts to share this video, to do a watch party on Facebook and just get us out there, because I really want you to hear these speakers tonight. Our first speaker is Anthony Johnson. He's an NHS nurse and he's also a trade union organiser in the NHS. Anthony is doing some very impressive work with the NHS Pay 15 campaign. So we're very, very lucky to have him with us here tonight. So over to you, Anthony. Tell us all about your campaign, how and why it started and who you're trying to reach.
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Anthony Johnson. I'm a registered nurse, as we've all said, and I'm a health visitor by background, and I'm also the lead organiser for Nurses United. I think that we've all seen at the moment how essential frontline workers have been during this crisis. It's not been Richard Branson with his hot air balloons or Matt Hancock with his app we've needed. It's been our porters, it's been our cleaners, it's been other caring professionals like teachers and nurses who we've needed in this moment. And the problem in the UK has often been that governments don't value caring or care work in general. And when I say care work, I don't just mean us as healthcare professionals, but the large amount of unpaid care work, which normally is serviced by parents or carers. And that's increased even more during the last 6 months when you've been seeing people have to do that role 24/7. And I think it's important for us to remember that the NHS stabilised the economy and we create it as healthcare workers by spending money. And it's really important to remember that we're a resource, we're not some cost or expenditure. We're a fundamental lifeblood of the UK's economy, but also, as COVID has shown, our entire society, we depend on the health service from when we're born to our last breath. And where, healthcare, we often believe in Nurses United is bigger than whether or not you just have access to healthcare, but whether or not you live in a society that gives you the freedom to be healthy. Do you have access to stable homes? Are you able to live in an environment which actually allows you to be healthy? And I think it's really important to remember that this lack of care and value for healthcare workers, though, is not some pie in the sky thing. It's actually cost lives for people. In the UK, we're the world leaders in the death rate of health and social care professionals per 100,000 people. And we've all heard thousands of stories of nurses deciding between themselves who would get to use that last mask, or the racism that exists in our NHS and wider society. When we heard stories of our international nursing colleagues who didn't think they could complain about getting moved to hot COVID wards because they thought it might cost them their visas. And all of this affects people at home. It affects patient safety. It affects patient care. And even before COVID, I used to remember watching nurses in charge of a shift 5 years ago crying at the start of a night shift because they'd just been told that they were about to go through hell. Instead of having the 5 nurses on shift that they should have done, they only had 3. And this is down to the way that we've changed the health service. It's down to the way, well, not us, down to the way that governments have changed the health service by privatising it, by introducing things like removing the NHS bursary, by ensuring that we've cut nurses' pay, or NHS workers' pay, should I say, all across the country. And this is a thing that drives down patient care, makes patient safety be put at risk, and it puts you at risk at home. And this stuff isn't going to go away either. Half of all nurses are midwives, so that's 350,000 people are likely to retire within the next 10 years. And I was just recently speaking to a friend in Yorkshire, and she was telling me that already in our intensive care units, we're starting to cohort patients, which is essentially what we did during the pandemic, during the first wave, because that was the only way we were going to be able to staff intensive care units. We started doing 6-to-1 instead of doing 1-to-1, which is what we're supposed to do in intensive care. And that's why the NHS Pay 15 campaign matters so much, because the average nurse in the UK has lost a fifth of their pay since 2010. So it's not surprising that we have 100,000 vacancies within our NHS. And it's been an incredible ride so far at the moment of frontline NHS workers saying that they've had enough and getting organised, because it was only a few nurses from Essex, so Ness, Claire, Wendy, Will and Holly, who started this when they were angry about this government leaving them out of the pay awards. And then boom, we have a Facebook group that's got 83,000 people. It had 50,000 people within a week, because that anger has been there, it's been simmering, and that rage at the way our patients are treated. And from them putting together a Facebook group and calling a single demonstration and getting us involved to help as Nurses United, we've now polled people to get a percentage that people wanted to go for, which was 15%. And happily, it's been backed by GMB and by Unite. And we ended up with 36 demonstrations 2 to 3 weeks later, with thousands of people who'd never taken action, let alone gone along to a demonstration or planned one, showing how big you can be if you just trust people and give them the support and confidence to lead. And that's what our role has been within Nurses United, really, alongside other organisations like the People's Assembly, is supporting people to know how you plan a demonstration, knowing who you should target should be, how do you speak to the press, are you allowed to do this within your professional code of conduct? For any healthcare workers knowing, you're allowed to professionally campaign. We've been to the NMC, we've checked it out with them, they said we're allowed. But also, more importantly as well, what we're going to do to build up power in our workplaces and in our communities. And people have just gone off and run off and done it. And that's why we've had ridiculous things where, I've done media training for people, and then they've come back and told me they've done 40 interviews with regional media within a weekend. And I've been like, oh, wow, well done. Because most health professionals are passionate and impressive people in their day jobs. And I think that's what's different about us, is that we recognise that and we give them the space to do it. I've actually just realised, by the way, I should probably explain who Nurses United is and what we are. So we're a grassroots organisation of frontline nurses for frontline nurses, and we're tired of hearing that nurses and other NHS workers can't be organised. So we run campaigns like, we created a PPE monitoring tool way back in March, and then we made it give people PPE, or things like the Nurses of Colour Network on addressing racism within the NHS by building a racism reporting tool and an anti-racist charter. And that's all been possible because we invest in organising training and believing that people on the front lines, from a nursing assistant to a nursing consultant, are worth investing in. Because I think that at the moment, that's the challenge for us, but also the wider healthcare movement, is that we haven't had a culture within any representative body, really, of skilling up and organising our members for around about the last 30 to 40 years. And so I don't find it surprising that often we come up against NHS workers when we've been out campaigning in this campaign, where they're more likely to think that they're going to get a pen from us rather than being asked to take action themselves. And that's what they're going to need to do to be able to get a pay rise, because the expectation is that rather than swallowing a textbook and speaking to people in complex terms from us, we're going to speak to them like human beings. We're going to be honest with them. If they want a pay rise, you're not just going to get it handed to you. It's going to be you, it's going to be everyone else in your ward, but it's also going to be all the public who are going to have to come together and build power for it. Because that's what people keep saying as well with this campaign, is it's not just about pay, but am I valued? Do I think I'm worth more than a clap? Because for decades, most NHS workers haven't been. And that's what people want to change is, yeah, sure, raising pay is important for improving safety in the NHS, but it'll stop us losing more staff. It'll also, though, mean NHS workers spend money in the economy, which will create and retain jobs, which we need to protect the NHS. But we also need to get safe staffing. We need to get PPE on the wards to potentially survive winter. And most importantly, people want to know, are NHS workers going to start to build up the networks and structures for us to be able to challenge the things that make us unsafe on the wards and in our communities? And that's the hope and aspiration I have for this campaign, is for us to build power as NHS workers and to protect ourselves and our patients, which we all know with a universal health service in the middle of a global pandemic, could be any of us. And just on that point, by the way, I think this is the exciting thing for members of the public and the wider community to think about is backing this campaign is not just about backing and protecting the NHS, nor is it about beating COVID, nor is it about showing that you can support the healthcare workers. But because we're struggling to campaign as NHS workers, when we're working on long days, going to food banks and struggling to pay our bills, I think people should just take a minute to imagine what we could do for the campaigns to keep the NHS out of the trade bill if NHS workers were organised and confident, or what we could do to racism by talking about it as a health issue, because it is, with our 92% trustworthy ratings, or talking about housing as a health issue, which is also a health issue, or the old chestnut of climate change. We could do loads of things, which is why people need to get involved and back this campaign.
Yeah, thank you, Anthony. Thank you very much for that. We've had a few questions come in already, but I think the first question I want to put to you, Anthony, that's really will be screaming in people's minds during this call is, given the government announcement today and the fact that furlough is going to end and the employment support is really going to go down, there's going to be job losses, there's going to be redundancies on a mass scale in this country. Do you think it's right that NHS staff are demanding a 15% pay rise given those conditions?
Yes, yeah, I do. Obviously, we want furlough to continue anyway, because we believe that you need to invest in people to keep them safe. But there's been research into this that when NHS workers get a pay rise, they spend it. And that's part of the reason why is at the moment we're protecting bosses, we're protecting managers, rather than going and investing in people and ensuring that they're going to be able to pay their bills. And also, so the thing we need to remember is that we're going to potentially lose the NHS, and imagine the catastrophe that that's going to have with COVID if we don't invest in NHS services, with thousands of members of staff going to potentially leave. So we need to invest in us and the people who need their furlough scheme. But investing in us also helps them anyway, and helps us beat COVID-19.
Very well answered. Thank you. We've got a few comments that have come in. Alexander Wilkinson, CAMS needs more funding in order for them to work alongside NHS, maybe join two organisations into one roof. We've had another comment come in, we need health to be at the forefront of our culture. When patients present, the NHS needs to be funded properly and staff trained properly to put the child's adults' needs at the core of their treatment plan. And I think, yeah, that's very well said there. Now, we're going to now play a special message from our National Secretary, Laura Pidcock.
The government have failed us. They have failed to get a grip of the coronavirus crisis months and months and months after they first found out about the devastating consequences it could have. They failed over PPE, they failed to lock us down soon enough. The R rate is rising and the coronavirus job retention scheme will come to an end. This isn't just about their incompetence or mismanagement. This is also about their politics. Their politics is literally preventing us from recovering. So we've got to do something about this. We have to fight back. We have to organise against this government. They have an 80-strong majority in Parliament. And to do that, we need resources. So we are asking you to help us fund the fight back. Resources to fight back against this government. You know, it takes time, it takes money, it takes organisation to mean we can run big and brilliant campaigns that put pressure on the government. So whatever you have, if you have anything spare, please help us in our fundraising campaign, because they have failed us and we need to fight back.
Thanks very much. Before we move on to our next speaker, I've got a quick question for Anthony. Are you still there, Anthony?
I am, yeah.
Sorry, Anthony. Sorry, yeah, because I'm such a novice People's Assembly chair, I actually forgot to ask you, how do we get more information on your campaign? How does the public out there get more information?
So if people search for NHS Workers Say No and get involved there, obviously there's a large Facebook group there. Also, if people go along to our website at the moment, there's, you'll see it on the Facebook page, but we've got ways for people to be able to say that they're ready and willing to take action, and we can link you up with your local groups. And obviously that'll put you in our mailing list to find out the things that are going on. And also we've got loads of things on there, like our organising trainings. So it's those kinds of things that people are going to be really helpful with taking action. But another important thing to do is, and it is happening with COVID, is if people can talk to 5 members of the family and friends and any healthcare workers they know to tell them about the campaign, because that's going to be the challenge for us, is reaching people.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Anthony. Thank you. Okay, I'm going to move on to our next speaker now. Our next speaker is Karen Buckley. Karen is a psychological therapist in the NHS. She's also a union rep, and she is also a convener of Manchester People's Assembly. Welcome to the meeting, Karen, and over to you.
Hi, hello everyone. As you said, I'm Karen, and I work for the NHS in mental health services as a psychological therapist. So I work with people suffering moderate to severe depression, anxiety conditions, but we also work with people more complexity as well. I'm also a union rep for a day and a half a week. So I get to see a range of issues affecting NHS staff across the trust I work for. So I'm a big NHS fan. I believe it's the most precious institution that we have. And like most NHS staff, I joined because I wanted to make a difference. And what's great about working for the NHS is knowing that people get treatment they need regardless of income. And I think we need to always keep that. Many of the people I see won't be able to afford private psychological therapy as it's very expensive. And I do feel very lucky that I've been able to help quite a lot of people overcome psychological distress. So it's a very rewarding job, which I must say, because we do talk a lot about the stresses of a job, but it is actually very rewarding. So I totally support pay rise for NHS staff. I know speakers will say, but it is really looking that we have had a series of pay freezes and below inflation pay rises over the last 10 years. Which is actually equated to a 20% pay drop in real terms. So that's quite a big drop in pay. And many NHS staff work incredibly hard doing essential work, not just through the COVID crisis, but before that. And many NHS staff go well above and beyond what's expected of them. They work longer hours and they'll just do what they can, the extra mile to help patients. And I see that time and time again with my colleagues and other staff. But unfortunately, NHS staff don't have it easy. Over the last 10 years, it has got harder since we've had the Tories in power. So they've increased the privatisation, which has fragmented the services and sold off the profitable bits. And it's also suffered year on year underfunding. If you look at graphs of percentage-wise of funding, it's actually gone down over the last 10 years and is much lower than it was under, say, the Labour government. There's some quite interesting statistics that since 1955 that it's been so much lower since 2010. And so that's had quite a devastating impact, and it's put huge stress on NHS services. certainly I've seen it in mental health services quite a lot, especially with the more severe and enduring mental health issues, which I think have been especially affected. And I know that since probably around 2014, I think maybe 2013, I started to notice the difference. We started to get more targets. That's another thing that came in under the Tories. And we started to get more and more feeling of being stretched because we needed to see more people. You know, there was just more stress. And I know from the colleagues in severe and enduring mental health issues, they were getting more and more stretched as well. And so when you know, with having to see more people as well, there was less time for us to get the support we needed. So we started to, what was happening, we started to get more and more stress and symptoms of burnout. And there's been quite a lot of research, and quite a lot of researchers found that 48% of mental health staff and psychological staff show signs of burnout to some degree. Some of that's quite high, some of it's more lower levels. But there's certainly, that's quite, you know, a high number of people, you know, showing signs of burnout, which is, you know, very concerning.
Just to ask you there, are the signs of burnout, do you think, related to the job, the stress of the job? Is that kind of view? Yeah,
and it does depend on the service you work for, obviously. So it depends on them, but certainly it is seen across services that there's been a much higher burnout rate. Then, you know, so when I say burnout, it can be just feelings of exhaustion, you know, lack of concentration, affecting sleep, you know, to some more severe ends where people really go into crisis and they'll just go sick. So yeah, so it has been quite high. So working through the COVID crisis has not been that easy either. So the service I work for changed quite quickly from working at home, which was really good. Staff showed a lot of goodwill to work from home, and we did video calls and things. But one of the problems we've seen is that it actually increases isolation, because we've continually had to work at home, not seeing your colleagues. You know, so you've got that, but also a lot of staff have suffered the same anxieties. A lot of our clients are suffering, you know, fears of what's going to happen to relatives, you know, what's happening, you know, you can't see your mum or whatever it is. So a lot of staff have been feeling those stresses as well. But burnout and poor wellbeing has been a growing problem in the NHS services more generally over the last 10 years, not just in mental health services. And one of the fallouts of that has been a big loss of staff. So that puts a lot of stress on the existing staff, which I know was talked about by Anthony as well. But what we've seen is a big increase in agency staff. So that means we've not got that worker who gets to know the service users, patients, whatever. So we've had quite a lot of that. And what that's equated to is 40,000 unfilled nursing vacancies, which is 12% of the workforce. And the rate of staff leaving has tripled in the last 7 years, with 28% of nurses leaving in the first 3 years, which is a 50% rise since 2013.
You see, Karen, I'm really interested in that point particularly, because I think what health staff do is they tend to overextend themselves to fill the gaps. So sometimes the patients coming into the treatment don't actually see, you know, what's lying underneath. But like you correctly said, there's a lot of sickness and absence, and a lot of people actually saying, oh, I can't do this job anymore, I have to leave, and they find it somewhere else. And then the problem's just as bad, because the NHS is being defunded sort of across, it's having real-term funding across the board, really. So so I'm very interested in that point that you make there, you know, particularly. Yeah. So it's like about, we have to, you know, as health workers, it's really good that you can highlight those things and bring them out. And what do you think is the overall impact on patient care? What have you seen, you know, from these staff?
Well, it is. I mean, I think that, like I said, I think NHS staff and YC work incredibly hard, and I think they try to still provide the service that people need to have, because they feel responsible and usually quite empathic. So they're usually doing that. So I think the burden can end up on staff. So saying that, what I was going to go on to actually is that service users have been massively affected by austerity. A lot of the services that I would have referred people to, and certainly the more people in my colleagues who work with severe and enduring mental health issues, they relied upon services to keep them well. And the problem is now they've disappeared, or there's very few of them. A lot of people are going into crisis more. And then that has a big impact upon ambulances and emergency services that are having to deal with them crisis things. So, and I think one of the things is these staff do, you know, that I've seen it with some of my colleagues and some of friends who've worked in the NHS who have been leaving as well. So it is sad because what you see is a lot of very skilled staff disappearing and maybe going to work for private agencies. And sometimes one of my friends, that's actually been better for her, which I think is just such a tragedy to lose these really brilliant staff. And one of the other problems I see is that people can think, or some of the staff can think, it's me, I'm inadequate, that's why I can't cope. So I've had clients who have left as well that I've worked with, who've left the NHS because of that, and I've worked with them as a therapist because of burnout. And I think I just want to say as well is that what we need to see is the Tories will pull out the magic money tree whenever they feel like it. And so there's not actually, the NHS is not well, the budget, the economy isn't run like household budget, like austerity. You know, they say we need to pull our belts in and things like that. So we've got to really be careful that we don't let that happen, that they make NHS people pay. So just want to say for people to get involved in the campaigns, get involved in the People's Assembly, join a union, because it's only by collectively getting together that we're going to do anything and fight, not just austerity and cuts and everything else, but yeah, it's together that we're strong.
Well done. Excellent, excellent. Right, I've got a couple of comments here that I will read out. Lip Whitfield, hello Lip. NHS staff have often not wanted to take action as they put their patients first. This has been the guilt the Tories and managements have put on you as NHS staff to stop you fighting back. They continue to damage the NHS, ripping it apart, poverty pay and understaffing. It's time to fight. Well said, Liv, well said. We've got a comment from Jerry Ramsden here. We're the 5th largest economy in the world, but where does the money go? Exactly, very good indeed. And Alexander Wilkinson, I'm sad seeing NHS are not getting pay rise. After all, you saved the Prime Minister's life, exactly. And this is how the Tories treat NHS workers, exactly. And we have Belle Sebastian. Again, my question is, how does the 16 to 18 gap in mental health services impact when adult nurses are having to work with children and the complex needs issues they have? So there's a gap there. Perhaps you can answer that one, Karen?
Mm-hmm. Okay, so
gap in mental health services and how can they possibly work with children and complex issues? 16 to 18 gap. 16.
That's the CAM service, isn't it? And I do know they've been severely underfunded, you know, and that really needs looking at, because that really is a tragedy, because that does lead on till later on. I mean, it is for us fighting for it. It's what I was saying before. We need to fight for that, because that is an injustice, that we need to get those services there and the adequate funding, because of the underfunding. It's just really causing massive problems for society.
Yeah, you're absolutely right there. Okay, I'm going to appeal to everybody watching this to please share, please do a watch party, please tweet us, please Facebook us, keep your questions and contributions coming in. We also have another contribution from Ian Onion. COVID is a chance to re-establish the principles of the NHS. The execs are taking it as a chance to accelerate transformation. That's exactly right. We need to defend services as well as campaigning on pay. And I think, yes, exactly right. That's been one of the concerns during COVID. Everything's been happening under the radar without proper scrutiny. Wards are being closed and shifted about. People are being redeployed. And there is a genuine concern, I think, that wards will remain closed and people will remain in roles permanently. And so as unions, we have to be alive to that in health service. So absolutely right there. Okay, so I am going to move on now to my final speaker tonight. Last but certainly not least is Kelly Robbins. Kelly has worked on the front line of the NHS for 10 years as a nurse. She has recently become an activist for the GMB trade union. During COVID, Kelly has learned to become a union organizer during the coronavirus pandemic. And not only that, Kelly has led the hugely successful NHS Pay 15 protests in Brighton. So Kelly, it's a real pleasure to have you with us tonight. Over to you.
Thank you for having me, Helen. Sorry about the dark room, by the way, but I think it adds a mood. As you said, I'm a GMB activist, practice nurse, and I organise the marches in Brighton with my union support. I have worked in the NHS for 10 years, before practice nursing, I was ward-based. So I have seen the changes to services due to austerity over this time and always stood against them, raising concerns, reporting unsafe situations. The reason I left the hospital was related to concerns around care delivery. With the pressure we face from understaffing and lack of resources, I felt I couldn't do a proper job and provide adequate care to my patients. You'd find yourself leaving patients waiting because you were stretching yourself thin between other tasks. Hospital wards are treated like markets, awarded budgets and put in deficit. You'd find wards having to cut costs on basic patient care provision like urine bottles, incontinence sheets and soaps. You'd find them buying them in for yourself, like for the patients, or begging another ward to lend you items as though it was precious metal. It stops cooperation and creates division, and this is the market of the NHS. You want to stay to not let your patients down, but you end up leaving because you could face losing your registration. When I heard Boris Johnson announce pay rises for the public sector, yet leaving out NHS staff, it was time for me to stand again. Since taking action, it's become apparent that in order to fight for improved pay conditions, we need to join together and continue fighting the many other glaring problems with the treatment of the NHS, namely privatisation. With my experience, it is apparent that the hollowing out of the public sector over a decade has led to catastrophe and chaos during the crisis, and that working ordinary people have had to pay for this with their lives. Now that services are trying to get back to normal, it's also apparent that due to a chronic underfunding, chronic understaffing and chronic under-resourcing by a Tory government, that we are now seeing services in difficulty to deliver and resume that normal service. As I've said, the NHS were already in crisis before the pandemic, and now after the lockdown, how does the government expect us to resolve the backfill if they aren't investing in this? My mum and dad are both currently awaiting interventions under the NHS that were delayed due to the pandemic. They're still waiting for some aspects of their care to get restarted. I found myself almost subscribing to a blame narrative of what are the NHS doing, blaming the people on the ground for decisions being made way above their remit. These problems did not start with the NHS. It starts with scrapping bursaries. It starts with lack of retainment of workers. It starts with not investing in infrastructure. It starts with the defragmentation of services that are no longer NHS owned. It starts with defunding services and procedures. It starts with an underfunded NHS, and it starts with the government. So there are two recent examples of this endangering dismantling of the NHS. One is the world-beating test and trace regime led by Serco. My trust in our government seeps away when people are having to refresh their web browsers for 2 days before they can even book a test, and then drive to a test centre to find it completely empty. My faith in the fairness of this scheme dwindles when a nurse in the southwest of England has to drive 50 miles for a booking, only to find they haven't even been sent the correct code, and then the next available slot is in Dundee. Already last week, we had 3 GPs off work for several days waiting for track and trace tests. This week, we've had 2 nurses who needed a test on Sunday, tested yesterday, and finally are expected to return tomorrow. And then there has been no pool of staff to cover these absences, as there is already a recognised shortage of doctors and nurses entering into primary care. I have paper, very sorry. We have now been told that hospitals are not allowed to test staff and patients without an application to the Department of Health and Social Care first. My worry with this is the impact on everyone who within the NHS and the knock-on effect this will have on patients. And my worry is that people who go off sick, who could be supporting our patients, especially those with young children, and that's going to have a greater impact. There's also staff that actually are on different contracts, and then they might feel pressured to work within the NHS, and therefore we're going to end up sending patients back to care homes and residential homes yet again with COVID. I'd also like to refer to the inadequate provision of PPE. It's a sad fact costing many lives that we are all too aware of, including over the loss of 640 health and social care staff. I actually believe today we were told it was 650. We were sent expired stock that required recall, stock that wasn't fit for purpose, and at points we struggled with any provision at all. This is just where I worked. The particular inaction taken by our government makes the glaringly obvious phrase, cuts cost lives, all too real. Now we hear that £500 million worth of PPE contracts tendered by Matt Hancock to his business chums has not materialised. How are we expected to trust these politicians to keep us safe? We need to reverse privatisation and not extend it. The Tories have used this crisis to give the private sector lucrative contracts that they're unable to fulfil. I recently read a post from another angry voice which articulated how I felt, which is that this is an exercise in inefficiency whereby the blame is laid at the foot of the NHS for the failings of privatisation in the healthcare system. Our government's response to our campaign for fair pay has been inadequate. We lobbied our MPs for support, and as you can imagine, our sympathy came from opposition parties, yet we received generic statements from Tory MPs. Although it appears they couldn't even agree on a figure, as they all claimed that we'd had something between 4 to 12% of a pay rise in the last 3 years. If they can't even work that figure out, how can we expect them to make decisions on our pay? You may believe that the UK cannot afford a pay rise for NHS workers right now as we go into another recession. However, when we look at the amount of misspent government funding for vanity projects and tax evasion by large corporations, you realise this isn't about lack of funds, but about political priorities. In 2017, a study showed that if you give workers a pay rise, half of it comes back in taxes and the remainder is spent in local businesses, which supports our local economy. But this is why healthcare workers always miss out, because we give in and put the needs of others above our own. We never ask our patients to help us. It's not in our nature. But the reason that we need a fair pay rise now is to ensure safer staffing, safer patient care, and to preserve our NHS ahead of this second wave and for the future. We have nurses who work 40-hour weeks, staying late many hours unpaid, let alone having to work overtime just to make up a decent wage, and they feel overworked by doing this. Many have seen the erosion of our shifts. We used to see nurses work 8 hours instead of the average 12 plus. And for a time, these shifts would overlap. So you would have more nurses for an hour at each changeover, meaning safer care for patients. What do you expect the standard of care to be after all this has come to pass? I've had colleagues of mine who work as healthcare assistants compare how a nurse on a basic day rate would earn less than a healthcare assistant who happened to do unsocial hour shifts that week. Healthcare assistants are an integral part of the nursing team. However, many of us have gone on to do further training, which therefore comes with further legal responsibilities towards our patients. How is it that a nurse goes to university to obtain a degree, to now do a lot of the work that doctors used to do, to have the pressure and responsibilities that we face on a daily basis, only to not have this reflected in our pay? In fact, degree nurse training was introduced to put forward the case that nurses have become more highly skilled and deserve better pay, but this clearly hasn't translated into our wages. No one comes into our roles for the money, but the intent to leave a job is directly linked to job satisfaction and staff well-being, which are both directly linked to pay. We have lost 140,000 nurses since 2010, and that's just nurses, not even the rest of the NHS workforce. These attrition rates are due to poor pay, demoralisation and overwork. NHS workers are leaving in droves, and there are currently 100,000 vacancies. 40% of our nurses are due to retire in the next 5 years, and we already have 44,000 nurse vacancies. We have 20,000 students annually, but lose 1/3 of them every year. The continuation of no pay rise will lead to seriously unsafe staffing and will affect all services. Can the country afford a pay rise? With a second wave of coronavirus resurfacing, we can't afford not to. While I am proud to work for an organisation that cares so much for those who need us most and has gone above and beyond during this pandemic, I am also angry that NHS workers sacrifice so much of their own physical and mental health, but are recognised so little by our government. The end result of this is, if we don't get paid properly, then staff leave, waiting times go up and care standards go down. And this has implications for everyone.
Wow, Kelly. All I can say after listening to all of that, I could listen to you all night, and all I can say listening to all of that is you are an absolute credit to the GMB Trade Union, an absolute credit. We're so lucky to have you.
I'm full of a lot of, lot to say, you can say.
Oh, bravo. We've got loads and loads of comments on here and questions on here coming through. Your officer, Gary Palmer, who's come in. I know Gary very, very well indeed. And he's come in and said you were absolutely spot on. You've got loads of people saying well said and clapping. There's one important question on here, actually. I'm just looking for it right now. Angela Robinson. And Angela, this is a very good question, actually, and it's very relevant to all of us who Well, I used to be an activist in the NHS, you're an activist in the NHS now. And Angela says, staff are afraid to raise concerns as they could risk their jobs. How do you address this? How do you...
That's an interesting point, actually. I think Anthony raised it earlier, in fact, and I think it is probably the fear that comes not only from our registration with the NMC, but also with our actual direct colleagues and management above us. And I can only say that we start at the grassroots, you try and get support from people around you, and I think that slowly you'll be able to work it through your organisation that this is happening. And I find that we've got support from the NMC, we've got a brilliant document from them, so I'm happy to share that, and it actually shows their support for us, because what they've identified is that when we're trying to do things for the better of our patients, which is what our NMC code is all about, that this is safe action, that we're taking action to actually safeguard our patients and their care, and that's why it's very important. So we are protected. So should you be worried about this going to some sort of tribunal or something, the NMC have now got a statement where they support us in these actions.
Brilliant.
That helps.
That's absolutely brilliant. Victoria Cam, brilliant. Kelly Robbins, spot on. Stacey McCann, absolutely spot on. You have got, I'm just trying to see if there's any more questions there. I mean, Kelly, one of the things I'm really interested in knowing from your inside kind of view into the NHS is, what do you think the mood of people around you is, your fellow nurses and your health workers? What do you think the kind of mood is?
Oh, well, I mean, a lot are saying that after these last 10 years of austerity, then COVID, then the way the government has handled this, followed by a pay rise snub, we've heard that a lot of people are thinking of leaving. And so there was actually a survey that said about, so it's a survey of 48,000 nurses, and it showed that over half of them were considering leaving the NHS due to pay, so and other factors, but that was a large part of it. So they were just feeling quite demoralised, I think, after everything has happened. So like many things throughout COVID have actually now led to us to a breaking point. So like seeing colleagues and patients becoming so ill, worrying about our families, the PPE, the guidance, the restrictions, the way it made people feel, how ill people were and having to deal with that, the deaths that were happening. A lot of us were actually placed in areas that we'd never worked in before. Some of us were newly, into practice and just suddenly, straight into caring on COVID wards. I mean, people were kind of expected to sort of upskill really quickly. We were trying to care for our patients with equipment that we hadn't even that usually would work, but actually this time didn't. And then we're having to deal with the fear of whether we were doing more harm than good. So that's a lot, that everyone's coped with. And I feel like we don't show that to our patients because we don't go to work to tell them our problems and our worries and our fears, but we carry that with us. And I think that's what's bubbling under the surface.
And I think definitely, during the first peak of the COVID, certainly a lot of my members were saying to me, I'm absolutely terrified. I'm gonna catch this condition. I'm gonna bring it home to my family. I'm gonna bring it home to my kids. People were vulnerable people. And, that it was really, really difficult for people to get the PPE at first. That took time. And the quality of the PPE as well was really, really, because we're literally flimsy little kind of mask and a little apron going into the heavy COVID areas with very sick patients.
And that was led by advice as well from the government and PHE, through PHE telling us, oh, this will be acceptable for the work you do. And they changed that throughout the pandemic about this is what's safe now. Oh, that's actually not safe anymore. And that felt very unsafe.
Well, what was striking to me was when I was looking at what they were doing in other countries, and the people in the airports were having 3 and 4 layers on, and masks and eye protection and everything like that. And and then in this country, you're in the hospitals in the worst, most kind of infectious petri dish type areas for the disease, and you've got you've got just really flimsy gear. It just was so blatantly wrong.
Oh yeah, entirely. When the pandemic first started, or when it was on its way, and we were thinking, okay, we've got to get stuff in, unable to get hold of it. The government saying, oh, wear this little tiny plastic apron and wear this mask that's flapping around your face. obviously I caught COVID at work, you know, that was bound to happen. I did my duty, I went in, but I thought I could really get this, and this doesn't feel appropriate. And I guess a lot of us just sort of did our work, you know, that's what we did for our patients and our country, but actually in hindsight it really wasn't acceptable.
I've got another question in here, actually, just really, really quickly. Subatri Bertram, he says, could you not raise concerns via the whistleblowing system? And I tell you what, in my opinion, no, you cannot, because I know people who've actually done that, and basically they've really, really suffered, actually. And one case that springs to mind is the case of Dr. Chris Day at Epsom and St. Helier Hospital, who has been pursued by the trust. Hundreds and thousands of pounds of public money have been spent because that doctor tried to raise legitimate health and safety concerns in the ITU that he worked in, and he has been pursued. His life has been made a living hell, and they tried to destroy him. So no, Subatri, you cannot, you know. And equally, going to the Speak Up Guardian or anyone of that nature, I would say to any NHS worker in this country, join a trade union.
I will have to add to that as well, actually, that the difficulty also didn't just lie with your hospital trying to get provisions in as well, although you hear about that sort of culture, but it's also the fact that it comes from up above with the stores that we actually had in this country, and that wasn't provided. So you can whistleblow to your manager, but if they can't get that stock in, that responsibility doesn't lie with them, you know, that goes much higher.
Yeah, absolutely. So I've got a couple of more comments here. Where is it now? Let me find it. Yeah, I've got Peter Noland. He said he's retired, but he will stand by workers any day and the NHS. Thank you very much for that. Gary Palmer, Kelly, looking forward to the next Brighton rally on the 31st of October as we pumpkin our way onto Halloween, and hashtag NHS Pay 15. Thank you very much for Gary. And okay, it looks like, let's see if there's any more questions to ask you there now, Kelly. I think you've drawn out just the impact on patient care of people leaving and the deteriorating conditions. Yes. Okay, so I think we've pretty much kind of touched on most things there. And you're GMB, you're just coming into activity now, and you know, I recognize, I get the fact that nurses, you know, and health workers are extremely busy people. They're in highly stressful jobs, and we're asking a lot of you to kind of step up and become activists as well. I get that it's really, really difficult, but I think, you know, people like you, Kelly, you know, are actually the future of the NHS. And one of the things we're seeking to do via the People's Assembly is to kind of link up the NHS, brilliant NHS community campaigners who are out there already with the staff inside the hospitals, and link you all up together and just make sure we build power that way as well. It's very, very important. So very well done for everything you do, because not just are you kind of looking after all the patients day in, day out, you know, in difficult conditions, you're also stepping right up and playing a leading role as an activist. And I know that's hard myself, you know. So I think we're moving on to me closing the meeting now. So I want to thank all of our speakers. So we had Anthony Johnson, Nurses United UK, Karen Buckley from Manchester People's Assembly, and yourself, Kelly, an NHS nurse. So before we go off air, there's a few things I want to remind all the viewers about. We have a coordinated day of action on October the 17th, a very, very important day. Please put that date in your diaries now. If people want to know what's going on, or they have to keep a check on the People's Assembly website, very, very important. We're in a very difficult period, and we recognize that. And we know, you know, the coronavirus situation is not, it's changing all the time, and we're keeping a really, really close eye on that, and we're assessing it day by day. But save the 17th of October in your diary. If you want to do something locally, if the conditions allow you to, then we want you to let us know about that. And you can email, if you want to do something local and you want the People's Assembly to support you, email office@thepeoplesassembly.org.uk. That's again, office@thepeoplesassembly.org.uk, but save that date in your diary. And the reason we're going to have the Day of Action is because, you know, it's become increasingly clear after today's government announcement that we're going to go into a very, very difficult period. The furlough scheme, that the employment support is going to be reduced. It's going to be very, very difficult. You know, and the government is hell-bent on making working class people pay for this crisis. And they're not only going to do it in economic terms, but in terms of our health as well. So we're going to keep you updated on everything. I think I'll bring the speakers back for some final closing comments. So can we have the cameras on again, please? We've got Anthony, we've got Kelly, and have we got Karen? So Anthony, a couple of minutes just to kind of like round things up nicely for our listeners would be fantastic. A couple of parting thoughts.
Sure. I think what the real important thing for us to do is when this pandemic started, we saw all the different forms of solidarity that people are willing to express in this moment. We saw mutual aid groups. We saw people helping, like we were doing it, helping older people on our streets and stuff. And I think that that's the kind of thing we need to hold on to, especially with the attacks that are going to come with people removing furlough, with the, you know, the end to the eviction ban is when we all stick together that's how we're going to win. And with this campaign on pay, that's also the same thing. And it's really important for us to remember.
Thank you for that, Anthony. And Karen, what are your parting words and thoughts?
Well, just really to repeat that the NHS is far too precious to lose. And I think that we really need to get behind it, you know, together as much as possible in our unions, in local assembly, people's groups, in campaigns, because really that's the only way that working class people or working people have ever made a difference. And we can move the government in that way if we come together as a mass movement. And I think that, I know that it's COVID times, but I think as long as we go and we socially distance, we wear masks, it's probably it won't be, it's probably more dangerous in a supermarket. And so I think that if we just carefully make sure that we do protest and come together, I think we can really make a difference, not just for the NHS, but everything against austerity, against all the injustices that the Tories have done to us over the last 10 years. If we just look at the history of the trade union movement, we stand on the shoulders of giants. You know, those people have made such a difference and we can do it now. So yeah, get involved. That's what I would say.
Thank you, Karen. Thank you. And it does strike me actually that the cutbacks, the restructures and everything are still ongoing actually during this pandemic. You know, so we have to find ways to resist. I think that's really, really important, even during the coronavirus pandemic. So Kelly, over to you for some closing words, please.
I think I'm going to summarise the reason why why nurses need to get that out there and fight for our patients is that if we look at the initial handling of this pandemic with a late lockdown, lack of adequate PPE, inaccurate recommendations on which PPE we should be wearing, sending vulnerable patients back to nursing homes, with COVID, horrific rates of deaths, which are in part due to the underfunding for the last 10 years, through inadequate preparation, inadequate staffing, and inadequate resources, to now where the government have tanked the economy, they've brought the NHS to its knees, they have failed a generation of school children, terrified huge sections of society, ignored our own experts, and allowed one rule for themselves and another for the rest of us. We need to remember that that's why we're fighting this.
Wow, and what a way to close this meeting. What a way to close this meeting. Well, comrades, I hope you got something meaningful out of the meeting tonight. Thank you everyone for your questions, your comments. Thank you for tuning in and listening to us, and have a very good evening. Thank you very much.